Hello, this is James Quintero from Texas Public Policy Foundation. Welcome to our presentation on how to protest your property tax appraisal. Joining me today is the great property tax extraordinaire, Mike Berlanga, who is going to educate us on how we protest all of those big, great values that everyone just got sent. In fact, Mike, thanks so much for joining us today. I cannot think of a more timely topic to discuss. I just got my notice of appraisal, and after I fell out of my chair and picked myself back up, I started wondering, what do I do about it? And so I'm very glad to have you here today with us to tell us how we fight our property tax appraisal.
Well, I'm privileged to be here. We go back a few years, and this is gonna be so much more dynamic than last year. We've already seen how that's been affected by traveling to El Paso, as you know, where 150 people showed up to one of the Texas PPF's foundation outreach, and it was only promoted for a week. So hopefully those that are come on today will be able to actually tell their friends, family, and neighbors, because the deadline actually is tomorrow, and in some friendlier counties it's Monday. So hopefully everybody has their notice in front of them, or if not, we're going to include in the slide exactly how they can fill out that notice.
Well, I can't think of a more fun and relaxing way to spend my Saturday than protesting my taxes. But again, to your point, there are some places out there where the deadline is not May 15th, but instead is May 17th. And Mike, how would you advise people to learn about when their specific deadline is?
Call the county appraisal district, or consult with their website. In Bexar County, because of COVID, we're probably one of the friendliest counties. Not that our values aren't going through the roof, at least in their mind, but they've extended to the 17th. In some counties, I'd rather not name, one of them being El Paso, you sometimes don't get quite the quoting of state law accurately, and that we'll talk through that, because we realize that we're talking to a statewide audience, and so what's true in the Valley may not be true in Travis County, may not be, but I'll try and monitor what is true across the board.
And so, Mike, I got my notice of appraisal, and again, mine went up probably about $75,000 from one year to the next. So of course, I'm going to protest, because that is a massive increase. But what would you tell somebody who is on the fence? Maybe they saw only a $10,000, a $15,000, a $25,000 increase. They're not really sure whether it's worth the time and effort. Would you advise that person to go ahead and protest, or just let it go?
What I'm going to advise and what I'm going to illustrate is, if you take that notice of value, and we're going to show you the form that you got, and we're not that yours individually, but that everyone got, and how the government is basically conditioning us not to turn the form over, where the notice of protest that you fill out allows you to also ask for the county's evidence. So think of it as, you don't know what you want to eat at the restaurant until you actually get the menu. But we're going to make a reservation at the county tax restaurant. We're going to ask them for the menu. Then we'll decide whether we want to share a meal. That makes sense? So you're not obligated to keep going, but they've told you what, they put their cards on the table. They've said, this is our value. And what we want to say is, where did you get that value? And we're going to explain to you that you have that right under state law. And not all the counties are quick to tell you. They're not as quick as Bexar County, where we have a red box. It literally says, request your evidence by checking this block. And in Williamson County, I learned this year that when we called, they said, oh, it's online. But you're the first person that's ever asked for it. So, county to county, it varies, but by state law, if you request the evidence that they use to come up with a value, they've got to provide it to you 14 days prior to your formal hearing. So that gives you time to know what they're going to say and prepare what you're going to say. And we're going to go through that in a case study, James. Like last year, I know we talked a little policy, a little process. Today, I'll leave this for another session to talk more policy. but we're going to teach them a process that they can implement right now. They may not agree with what the legislature has achieved or not achieved or what could still be achieved, and all the hard work that y'all put into influencing legislation. But what they're going to walk away with today, I promise you, is going to hopefully inspire them that if I'm asked to come back, we can come back after the deadline. I think you said last year, more people after the deadline were interested in what we had to say, because by that point, they're in the middle of the battle. They're like, well, I filed a protest, but how do I do this?
Mm-hmm.
So we're actually, unlike last year, I've got a case study that came out of an attendee to one of these seminars, a 65-year-old man, and you and I were joking about our challenges in technology, and he put together the case study that he's allowed us to share, and it's going to take us from informal to formal to arbitration, and you're going to see this progression. Your question, I think I didn't answer, is that every year stands on its own. So in the case of Mr. Cifuentes, who we're going to illustrate, he didn't protest in prior years, and yet he's getting a lower value this year than he did for the last 3 years. Now, if he had been around 3 years ago, he'd have enjoyed savings for the last 3 years.
Well, that's terrific to know that folks are getting some value out of last year's session. And of course, we hope to spread the message far and wide this year, because to your earlier point, protesting is such an integral part of trying to keep a handle on your ever rising tax bill. Plays a very important part in the process, and citizen participation is one of those necessary ingredients to really getting a handle on your taxes. So Mike, with that said, I know you have an updated presentation that you want to share with the audience. It's a little different than last year's, and in fact, I believe it's going to be much better based on the feedback that you've given me. So looking forward to seeing what you have to present today. If you want to go ahead and share that with us now, let's get started.
All right. Well, thanks again. That's my contact information. Again, the presentation's available to those who attended, and we welcome you to send us your email or let us know if you want to follow this PowerPoint. So if you want to sit back and listen, you can still get it. You can take screenshots as you go. This is free. It's an outreach jointly between myself and the Christian Chamber of soon to be Texas, and the True Tax Center, the nonprofit that I lead to provide these seminars. But let me see. We have a little. Yeah. So I want to thank you, and I want to reemphasize what we've done is not only today digitally, but what we've done with one of your colleagues, Rafa Behar, is we've taken this on the road, and we know that if there's somebody out there that's saying, you know, my church might open up its venue as we did in El Paso, or there's some convention center, or there's some facility, some event center like in Wilson County, where a school district board trustee was able to reserve an event center. 300 people showed up live, you know, in Wilson County, out of a county that only has 42,000 property owners, and only 2,400 people protested. So I want to thank the joint effort that we're doing this digitally, we're doing this live, we can do this hybrid, and we're going to talk today about the schedule, your rights, and the process. So without any further delay, I want to say that by introduction, I'm a CPA, which I like to say stands for cow parking attendant when I talk about these things, because if you have a ranch like I do and you have enough cows, you don't pay taxes like you would in the city with your quarter-acre lot or less or more. But I am certified public accountant. I've been so for over 40 years now. And as a licensed real estate broker, I want to also explain why neither designations make me an expert in what we're going to talk about. But in combination, I found this middle ground that I think is of great value to all of us as neighbors. I previously told you that I'm president of the Christian Chamber of San Antonio. And so I like to start with scriptural authority, because Jesus said, give to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's. So Caesar's dead. Last time I checked, no Bible has been amended to include any county in Texas suggesting that we need to overgive to that county. So we've got scriptural authority, but we also have legislative authority. The Texas Taxpayer Bill of Rights came about from a legislature of some time back that said we have these rights as Texas taxpayers. And the right that I want to emphasize is their sixth right, and that is we have the right to contest a decision. Basically, we've been told by a decision made by the county that our property value is X, whatever it might be. And we have the right, thanks to the legislature, to contest that decision. So we've got scriptural authority, we've got legislative authority, and if that isn't enough, a great judge named Learned Hand, I didn't make this up, well quoted former Supreme Court Justice, I believe, said tax avoidance is not tax evasion. So nothing we're going to teach is fraudulent, nothing is immoral, nothing is not without the knowledge of the legislature, and hopefully that will empower people to get more involved in this process. And so let's get into it. Let's talk about the schedule, because everybody right now is probably becoming aware that they got a notice early April, and it seemed to suggest that they had till May 15th. In some counties, like Bexar County, they're being friendly enough to extend it to May 17th because the 15th falls on a Saturday. And that means that either by virtue of filing it through an email sent or certified mail, or with some kind of evidence that you filed it postmarked by Saturday night at the earliest, or maybe May 17th at the latest, or 30 days after you receive that notice, if you can prove you got it late, that's the deadline to file the protest, which is not all the evidence, but, and we'll get into that, but it's just getting you in line. It's getting your right started towards the first step. January 1st, however, is the effective date for discussing all about value. And I can't emphasize that enough because many people will hear this and say, but my home is worth something more next week or next month, according to my favorite realtor, or houses are just selling all around me. We're not talking about the future value next week or next month or next summer. We're talking about last January 1st. So we're going to talk about that at length. But before I go to the next slide, I want everyone to realize that, you know, appeals, these hearings are going to take place after you get in line. You're going to be able to have maybe an informal hearing, followed up with a formal hearing. It varies from county to county. And this is what's going to set in motion what our taxes are in the fall. So right now, we're going to impact on what we're going to save next fall, and then the process repeats itself. It's deer season, and we're the deer. We just don't want to be the venison in the fall. So again, let me come back to this. It's very important. I've done this for thousands of people, this presentation, and that's why I now have one slide. January 1st is the effective date. Not today, not next week, not next month, not 2 years ago. Okay, so James, I know you bought your home approximately 15, 16, 17 months ago. It doesn't matter what you bought it for then. It matters what it was worth January 1st. God forbid if your house had burned down New Year's Eve because the fireworks got out of control and land and slab was all that was left, then we'd only be talking about land and slab. So, you know, another concern is some of us, you know, we're very proud of our homes. Well, I will tell you, your home is where your heart is. We're not talking about your home. We're talking about your house. So I'm going to change the channel of your thoughts, try and dial down our humility, and maybe step up our critical eye of our house. Sometimes we may need our spouse to remind us of the honeydews that we'd both like to get into, but we haven't had the time or the money to make that a priority. So we're talking about January 1st. Again, that the best extreme example, but any version of this is, what did we need to do to make our home market ready January 1st? Mm-hmm. And we find that many times, and what have we spent since then, since January 1st? Well, maybe since then, during the freeze, we got some things done because we had nothing else to do, but you know, paint or you know, we shortly before or after we got some shingles fixed, or we realized that there were problems, and we've gotten estimates, not that we have receipts for repairs made. We have estimates of things that we would do to the property if we were going to market. And this is where the opportunity is. You know, we know what is wrong with our home and the county doesn't. That's our Joker's wild card. And we're gonna show you an example of exactly how we make that case. So the county has sent everybody a notice of value approximately early April. And that notice of protest is on the back of this not a bill, not a tax statement, do not pay notice. I can't be more emphatic because it just makes me laugh when I look at this form that you all got. And at least in Bexar County, you know, 5 times, you don't have to look at the detail. If those of you are straining to look at this, I don't want you to look at the detail. It's not relevant. What's relevant is how the county tells you 5 times, don't pay. This is not a bill. As if you didn't understand this is not a bill, they put it in bigger fonts and they said it again 5 times on this. They're going to, what do you do with the notice when you get that says not a bill? It goes in the same pile as a lot of the junk mail. Many of us, including some educated financial planners, have been on this seminar and told me after they got off, this is a great seminar, but it's too late. I missed the deadline. This is what I was told last year. I said, sir, you haven't missed the deadline. The deadline is in the future. Last year was June something because in many counties because of the COVID. And he says, no, it's right here in front of me. I said, sir, send it to me. He sent it to me. It was last year's bill. It was the last year's notice. So for those of us that are, quote, not as informed, you're informed now. What is on top of your notice of value is the suggestions to ignore all this. But if you flip the form over, I've blown up what is the Bexar County Appraisal District form. And I'll comment as how your form might be a little different if you're in El Paso or a county not as, quote, friendly as my favorite chief appraiser in Bexar County is. But in Bexar County, we actually tell people, don't forget to check the box required to request evidence. We put it in red, and yet some people miss it. And again, in this example, it says protests are considered timely filed if they are postmarked by midnight, May 15th. But yet we are the friendly county. We know we're going to collect enough taxes. So we tell them, you know what, if you send it to us by May 17th, because of COVID, you're good. We don't mind you getting in line because we know 80% of your neighbors are not going to get in line. And that's a record low. 80%, James. So 80% of our neighbors, and remember that because that's going to come up as we talk through this process, 80% in Bexar County don't protest. So that means 80% of your neighbors are affirming by their silence that they agree. Now we know that they don't necessarily agree, but it kind of works against us. And that's why we're so happy when people want to file that protest, request the evidence. And this is all they have to do. In section 1, it's usually pre-printed, name of property owner, mailing address. But thanks to COVID, you're gonna hear me say that quite often, a little satirically, I might add, but thanks to COVID, there's my phone number, put in your phone number. There's my email address, put in your email address. Why? Because they may still be social distancing in some counties. They may still not want you to come in mask or otherwise. And even if you don't want to, that's your call. Even if you don't want to suffer through or endure maybe some inefficiency of waiting for your hearing or waiting to meet an appraiser, we don't want to eliminate the human element of hearing your voice and possibly finding an appraiser who is not a good heart donor. I jokingly say, I don't want an appraiser that's a good heart donor any more than I want an IRS agent that's a good heart donor. That means they've never used their heart. I want the one that's sympathetic and empathetic to the fact that they pay taxes too. So that's the new change to the form, is that they're going to ask for a phone number and email address. I strongly request you give it to them. You're not required to. We can do all this through snail mail and in person, but COVID's changed our lives in this respect, maybe in a good way. The second section asks for the property address if it's different. In this case, it isn't. Section 3 is very important. I put 2 red stars. Quite often we assume that we just need to protest the market value based on what other properties allegedly are selling for that are like our property. Remember, this is even though they've never been to our property. They've never been invited in the way the appraiser was when you borrowed money to buy the home. The second argument for protest that everybody should check is that your value may be unequal compared to other properties. It may be that they're comparing your property to other properties, but remember, if 80% of the neighbors aren't protesting, then it's there, it really isn't a relevant argument. But if you don't, but if in the event that yours is higher than your neighbors and you can't bring it up to make that argument because you didn't check that block, then you've missed out on that argument. So you have to indicate both reasons. Now you can indicate these other ones, but those are the two that are absolute, so that you, when you get your evidence, you get a comprehensive package of how they came up with their argument. In section 4, for many, many, many people listening, if you're not in Bexar County and you don't have a block that says evidence requested, as you see a little bit over to the right in a red box, you may not have that. That's where you would type, I'm not going to provide evidence at this time. That's what they're asking in section 4, but I do request the county's evidence. And that's all you have to say. You don't negotiate against yourself. This is like a poker game. And I don't play poker, but if I did, I'm not putting down my cards first. No, they, by the county that is, have to provide the evidence if you request it. If not, rest assured, they're going to show the evidence at the formal hearing, and you're not going to be ready. So you want to be ready by asking for it now, and you have the right to request it in section 4. We recently went through this in El Paso County, where it took us an hour to get the point across that the uninformed staffer was suggesting that we had to make a request under the Freedom of Information Act. That is just not the case. Now, in section 4, whether there's a block or not, and you request the evidence, look over to the right. It varies from county to county, and that's where you indicate how you wish to appear. Now, again, I used to say, please go down there, show that you're a human being, do it in person. But thanks to COVID, the counties are becoming friendlier. Some cases remotely by Zoom, and yet there are some who do not enjoy Zoom. Obviously, no one that's on this conference is not Zoom, anti-Zoom, but recognize if you don't do it by Zoom, or if they don't offer it, you also have a telephone conference. I would suggest at the very least do it by telephone. I am not going to recommend, I'm not a fan of digital protests, because then we're just going fact to fact, fact to fact. And those people on that panel who are sympathetic to human beings don't hear your voice. They don't recognize your face. They may not be, give you the benefit of the doubt. They may not appreciate the fact that if they saw me, they'd like my red shirt, or they'd like your tie, James, or they'd like perhaps my fair skin or your olive colored skin. I don't mean to suggest that there's a racial bias. I'm just being real, that we connect to different people in different ways, and we should be open to the possibility that we may connect. And I found it to be more favorable when we do connect. Then at the very bottom, well, also the next one, I left deliberately blank. It says, what do you think your property's value is? It's optional that you fill it in. Do not negotiate against yourself. Do not fill that in. Notice nowhere have I started to make my case. And then section 5 is to be ignored unless you've got 50 million or more. And if you do, please, I want to talk to you. I'd like to meet you. But just ignore section 5. Everybody skips that line and they start asking questions about it. That's only applicable if your value is 50 million or more, in which case we are looking for donors to the Texas Public Policy Foundation. We'd like to get to know you, but I'm joking, but I'm not. Section 6 is where you fill in your name, acknowledge you're the owner, and then sign it and send it in. That's it. That's it. We could stop right now. It's 12:26. I know we started a few minutes late, but we're not going to stop. But sincerely, that's it. So if you've got a friend or a neighbor and you can reference that you now know how to get in line, ask for the evidence, then we've succeeded, James. We've got them. We've got them in the game. We could come back with the rest of the presentation even after the hearing if enough people tell enough people and y'all send it in a request to the Texas PPF, we will have a larger audience and we will have more people who are now in the game and they didn't know that you and I were offering this interactive environment. But so let's move on. We're good through Monday or through tomorrow, depending on your county, and you're in the game. That's all you had to do. All right. So you don't have to spend all day Saturday, James. Hopefully you can do that in 1 minute or less if you follow those instructions. But what should you do? Now, aside from protesting your value, might make sure that you've applied for all exemptions for which you may qualify. You may be over 65. It may be your homestead. You may be disabled, military veteran. We're not going to talk about exemptions at length, but I just want to make sure that you understand that you want to make sure that you've applied for all the exemptions for which you may qualify. Generally speaking, the counties are very friendly in that regard. They don't really they're not going to dispute what you have the right to in that respect, and they're going to point out how you could indicate that. And you want to start getting informed as to what property sold for in your area last year, because essentially you're assessing your own property. You're your own appraiser. And the county, and I'm going to use Wilson County as an example, might have 7 appraisers, as they do in Wilson, for 42,000 properties. So James, imagine if you and I and 5 of our friendly appraisers worked for the county, and starting January 1st, they said, James, you've got 6,000 properties. Mike, you've got 6,000, go. We couldn't get to them all. It's just mathematically not possible. And that's why they're going to say, well, we did a mass appraisal. Mass appraisal invites us to say, well, look, we're talking about specifically my property, not what you guesstimated for everybody in the neighborhood of 6,000 people. Again, I'm using Wilson's numbers. So that's why we have to get more informed and be able to make our case uniquely for our property. Again, request the evidence package. If you request it, the county has to provide it. The benefit of having requested it is that now you know what they're going to say 14 days prior to your formal hearing. And another point about the evidence package, they cannot provide more evidence after they've provided it. They can't come back and say, oh, but we forgot to. And that takes us from here all the way through the arbitration process, which we'll cover. So what are they going to send you? They're going to send you an evidence report that I'm going to boil down to 3 parts. One is, how big is your property, and or how many structures do you have on your property? And sometimes they make a mistake. Sometimes a roof line covers maybe a porch that hasn't been enclosed, but they're assuming that it's all air conditioned. Sometimes there'll be a shed or some other outbuilding in the back, and you bought it that way, but it no longer is there. Or they presumed it was air conditioned when all it was just a roof that you parked your car under. So you have to recognize they may make a mistake, and they're going to be quick to correct it as you provide them the evidence and the testimony that you got it wrong. And that could be a significant multiplier. But the next element of evidence, and they'll give you a data sheet, it looks like a spreadsheet. They're going to talk about equity values. And I like to say it's anything but equitable to compare me to what they're saying, the county is saying about your neighbors, when 80% in Bexar County of our neighbors aren't protesting. So really, unless they're valuing my neighbor's properties less than what they're valuing mine, which then becomes an argument, I don't care that my neighbors are not arguing if my neighbors' values are higher than mine, based on, quote, equity. This is silence by my neighbors is not affirmation that they agreed. It's just ignorance. They were ignorant of the process and they failed to protest. It doesn't necessarily mean they agreed. The third set of data that you're getting in the evidence package is what we call comparable market sales. And if you'll notice, I put the word comparable in quotes. Why is that? Because we don't compare our home to a home that's been sold unless your home's ready to sell. And we're going to talk about through this illustration the fact that none of us generally have a home ready to go to market any more than we have a car ready to trade in. I mean, look out your window, and James, I'm sure your car is probably fairly clean, but I know you have a family and you'd probably detail it. You might tune it up, and you might, at least get it more ready if you're ready to go trade it in at the dealer this afternoon. At least that would be my recommendation. Our homes are the same way. They're not ready for market. There's got to be something wrong. And if you need some help, again, ask your spouse. Ask a friend or a family member what they would do if they looked at your home with a critical eye, or your house, I should say. And if not that, ask a realtor. The realtors are looking for inventory. They're going to jump all over it if they're a professional to offer you that service of walking through it and say, well, James, if I was selling your home, I would suggest you do this, this, and this. And so even for those of people who have brand new homes, relatively speaking, in neighborhoods where there's now a phase two, go to phase two and ask the sales counselor why they're offering a phase two. You just bought phase one only 3 years ago, 2 years ago. And I'm sure they'll tell you, just like a new car salesman will tell you why you need to trade in your 2-year-old vehicle because there's a new bell or whistle, and use that to bring your value down rather than allowing them to bring it up. So now here we are, we're talking to an appraiser, or we're talking at the formal hearing to a panel, and this Rubik's Cube will help you understand what we're going to present, because the English-speaking population is evenly divided into 4 distinct social styles. I like to say the reds reflect what occupationally would be described as salespeople. The yellows would be receptionists. These are high feeling to low feeling people who communicate first with their emotion, with their charisma, with their tone of voice, as I'm doing my best to, because the high thinkers to low thinkers are the surgeons to accountants. The surgeons, they may not be very, let's just say, bedside friendly, but really, I don't need a heart surgeon to entertain me. I just want to make sure that they get it right when they take my heart out and put another heart in and keep me alive. They're dealing with life and death. Facts are all their focus. They may not have a smile, but I just hope they have precision. But the accountant, while you might want them to have precision, generally doesn't kill anybody. So I've had to learn that I have to smile. I have to step up my volume if I want to appeal and get my message across to those people who are feelers. I can't put you to sleep talking like this, drawn, speaking below the tone that you want to be flexed to. So if I'm a typical accountant, with all due respect to my colleagues, I need to step it up a little bit, because 75% of my audience wants a little bit of entertainment. And so this is what you want to remember in flexing to that 75% of the audience that is your jury, if you will, on that panel of 3. You want to inform with facts. If you can see me up here on the upper screen, look at me. I'm saying, give them something that's factual. Give them data. I'm pointing, inform with facts. I look to my brain. Entertain with images. I look to what I can show them that they can see. And then I inspire empathy or sympathy from the board, because they're also taxpayers. And if I've done that, I've flexed my style, and I have a better chance of my message being received by the panel, regardless of whether they're feelers or thinkers. And the presumption is, well, these people are looking at all this data. There must be thinkers like the appraiser. These people are people who, I hate to say it, possibly just fogged a mirror. I mean, they possibly just have a blood pressure, and it's just high enough that they're alive, and they decided they wanted to spend a day getting paid a very nominal amount to be on a jury offering drive-through justice in negotiating the value, or ruling on the value of your property. And they get tired of looking at facts all day. And you might be the only case that day that went in and showed them pictures and showed them estimates, and didn't just go in there complaining that the legislature hasn't done enough, or the county's just out to get them. Leave the complaints aside. That's another day for another battle. Right now, we want to flex our message, and we're going to do this by the example package that somebody in this audience is going to be able to put together when we're finished showing them. Because this is a real live case that Mr. Cifuentes, who attended this seminar, put together and said, you're welcome to share it. And we're going to use this case study to really drive home the point that we're empowering you to follow this lead. So what does he do? He puts together the first page, and he says, here's a summary. Here's my date, here's my name, here's my year, here's my ID number. It's a 17-year-old home. And he starts to give an overview. He says, I need it painted. I need new windows. I got flooring issues. But what I want you to focus on is he's also next to a green belt on an odd-shaped lot with a steep driveway and a 0-degree incline that probably requires some steps. And he doesn't even know what that discount should be. And you're saying, but Mike, shouldn't he tell him? Well, the best way to show respect for somebody who's an authority, as the appraisal process implies the county is to invite them into the conversation. I don't know, Mr. Appraiser, but shouldn't something be shown? Because I'm going to show you whatever it is that a green belt has should suggest as a discount, because that green belt in his case is like a mosquito farm. And so let's proceed to the next picture, because this is a summary, but he follows up and he shows images of, look, I need painting. But then he comes back to those thinkers and says, and here's the facts. Rodriguez Painting says it's going to cost $2,900 to take care of all those painting issues. Oh, but look at the windows. These haven't been replaced in 18 years. And he follows up with the facts. And here's my estimate, $45,000. Now, you know, nobody said he had to go get the least expensive windows and do it himself. This is what it would cost by getting his Anderson or Pella windows. Then, oh, look, from ceiling, now we're down to the floor. The wood floor is old and water stained, and the carpet's a little mildewed. And there you go. Here's an estimate. So you're starting to get a drift, or at least hopefully, no pun intended, pictures and facts. Pictures and facts. Pictures tell 1,000 words, and look how quickly we move through that. So now we've gone out of the house, we've looked at it from God's view, and we've said, even though you live on a quiet cul-de-sac, Mr. Cifuentes, you're backing up to an unkept up lot. And are rodents coming in there? Are mosquitoes infesting? Well, maybe not that, but if I was a criminal, of which I'm not, if I wanted to look for a way to break into his home, I'm not coming up to the quiet cul-de-sac and having to do a U-turn to get out of there with what I steal. I'm going to go through that lot behind him, which connects to a major highway in San Antonio that's going to give me the quickest access away after let me come back to this, after I go through the fence that's already being in need of repair and make my way through the backyard. So going back to another issue that he had, bear with me. I also pointed out that he lived on an irregularly shaped lot. The builder builds rectangle homes because it's cheaper to have 90-degree angles, but sometimes they're using lots that are not 90-degree angles like this. I guess you'd call it a parallelogram. I don't know what's parallel about these sides, but obviously they're not maximizing utilization of the land. And I asked him about it. I said, well, you know, what about the fact that it's so forward set? And he said, look, Mike, funny you bring that up. I've got a 45-degree incline. I don't have any steps to get up the rail to get up those steps. And I was probably he was probably the last person out of his neighborhood after the recent freeze, because that was like a ski slope coming out of there, when compared to his neighbors who had flat approaches. So they're comparing him to homes that don't have this potential discount, you know, and after the freeze, we're looking at our properties a little differently. So that was not an issue before the freeze, perhaps, but I think it's an issue regardless of the freeze. You know, elderly people just don't have the means by which they can jump up those steps without a rail, and that's what he was pointing out. So he took this package to the Appraisal Review Board formal hearing, which is what you're going to hear about, because everybody's entitled to a formal hearing. In some counties, there's an informal hearing. Unfortunately, Travis County is not as friendly. So they're trying to eliminate that possibility that you could resolve the matter in a one-on-one, off-the-record conversation with the informal appraisal. But many counties offer informal hearings, hoping that they can just come up with a resolution and funnel down all these protests and only have to hire the board for the formal protests. So this board, which is a panel of 3, is going to hear this, quote, disagreement between what the county said your value was and what you're now saying based on all this evidence that they don't know about is what should justify a reduced value. And they're going to hear it, and it's going to be on the record. And we're going to talk through that real quickly as to what the best recommendation is to do that. But going into it, keep your peace. Breathe, smile, listen, respond, and don't become attached to the outcome before you even get the ruling. What I mean by that is, even though they're going to ask you, perhaps, what do you think your property's worth, offer a number that you hope you wouldn't second guess yourself on if they agreed with you. Leave them room to come down to a compromise that is still something that you're pleased with. But you're not volunteering that early on. You're going to come to that question probably at the end of the interaction. Commit to this process of presenting and appealing and be polite, be pleasant, but don't go first. They're going to ask you, Mr. Quintero, would you like to go first or would you like the county to go first? You're going to say, no, thank you. I'd like the county to go first. Why? You already know what the county's going to say, but isn't there some advantage we find in everyday discourse when we have the last say? So having the county go first, then Mr. Cifuentes went through his package, then the county rebutted, and I'm going to go through how that worked out. And then we didn't accept the appraiser's offer. He modified the offer in front of the panel. Like a game show, it was, do you want to take this offer or do you want to know what the panel's going to rule? And we always would rather go to the panel for several reasons. And one of them is, I've never seen a panel say the appraiser got it wrong. I've seen them say, that he got it too low. They may have gotten it, they may agree with the appraiser, but they may go lower than the appraiser because they feel like the appraiser just missed out on the points that we're making. So here we go. What did Mr. Cifuentes do? Well, he had a notice of value of $320,000. Initially, that was what was sent to him in April. And after he made his case, the appraiser in front of the panel now felt pressured, I guess, or sympathetic to offer him $300,000. And I was behind this camera. Imagine us on Zoom, and I'm on the other side of this camera, and he's in front. And I'm going, no, no. I'm making all the high signs like a third baseman coach saying, don't go for home. And in this case, I said, don't accept the offer of $300,000. And he didn't. He looked at his wife, he looked at me, and he goes, no, I'm not going to accept his offer. And then I said, make one more comment. Like, I really think that my lot is in my other issues have not been considered. And that was it. And they said, well, okay, thank you. Then our hearing is over. And now we're going to rule. And they're going to discuss it in front of you, the three people. You're going to hear it. But the hearing's over. No more testimony will be taken. And now they're saying, well, panel member number A, he says, well, I'm thinking 290. And panel member number B, well, I was thinking 290. And then, well, then I guess I don't need to rule. 290 is the number. And they ruled 290. But what he wanted to achieve was actually, 250,000. But because he let the panel rule, he now has the right to request arbitration. So he was having so much fun because at this point, when he went from 320 to 300, he had already saved $600 of real property tax dollars. When he went from 300 to 290, he saved another $260 or $70. I forget what exactly his tax rate was. But the point I'm making is, blink of an eye, he went from saving approximately $560 to another $270 or whatever that differential is. And now he's on a roll. It's like it being in Vegas, but he's playing with the house money. And he said, Mike, what can I do now? Well, I said, Mr. Cifuentes, you've got 60 days from when they send you the ruling by certified mail to consider going to arbitration, not litigation, not retaining an attorney to file a lawsuit at a cost of as minimum as $2,500 is what I've heard, to maybe $3,000. So this is not an option that you're hearing the property tax companies generally telling you about. You're not hearing them promoting it by property tax lawyers because they're not going to make any money if you go to arbitration. And yet that may be the best cost benefit option to now go in front of an arbitrator that you can actually request not be from your county. If you feel like there's some discrimination, perhaps in the fact that you just sensed the panel was constantly agreeing with the appraiser, you now have taken home field advantage away from the county because that arbitrator could be from Beaumont or Dallas or Houston, depending on who it gets assigned to. But you actually can request it either being from the county or someone not from the county. And there's only 200 arbitrators in the state. So there are some counties that you're definitely going to get a fresh look at this. And the panel is no more. You're not going back in front of the same panel. You're going strictly in front of an arbitrator. Now, our arbitration took place May 7th. We're waiting for the ruling. And we're excited. We're hoping that we're going to get somewhere between that midpoint of 290 to 250, because by way of example, if he gets to 269,999, he won. And if he wins, guess who pays for the arbitrator? County pays. I so far last year settled 3 cases by filing the request for arbitration, and they blinked and said, you know what, we don't want to push the issue. What can we do to make a deal today? And they gave us a lower number. And we didn't have to even see our check cashed. We do have to put up the deposit. We have to show we're sincere, we're convicted. We do believe we're entitled to a bigger value. But in the case of Mr. Cifuentes, you know, James, you were asking earlier, here's exactly his history. He was at 302 in 2017. He was at 307 in 2018. He was at 310 in 2019. He didn't protest those years. Those conditions didn't happen solely in 2020. And yet we're down to 290 and we're counting. And though we didn't have the value yet for 2020, without him having made any repairs or without them having any evidence that he's corrected those situations, they're now saying his value is 361 by market and 319 for assessed value. Now, what's the difference between market and assessed value? As you know, James, y'all and we are all fighting hard to put caps on how much the assessed value can go up. So his value has been maxed on for tax purposes from 290 to 319, a 10% increase. And we know that if something's allowed to increase 10% every year, in 7.2 years, your property value will double. This is why the Senate Bill 2 of a couple of years ago was passed, intending to limit the growth of local governments to 2.5% to 3.5%. And though it passed and everybody was excited about it, COVID provided an exception to the application of that bill. That's why we're seeing what I call the mad dog theory, that the local mad dog gets one more free bite because nobody knows the government's mad. And that's just my editorial comment. No disrespect to any government leaders. I work with government leaders who have the courage and the conviction to help their constituents by putting on these seminars. But what I want to emphasize in showing you Mr. Cifuentes' history is that if he had done this for the last 3 years, what would he have gotten perhaps 3 years ago? He might have gotten it down to 260 without much of an argument. He might have gotten it down to 270. And not only would he have saved money the last 3 years, he would have also limited the growth the following year, as we're hoping to, because if that 290 comes down to 250, as we hope, then that means they can only go up to 275 this year. So he gets a double dip in his effort through arbitration. And some of the myths, let's talk about the myths, because you're going to run into a lot of myths, a lot of misstatements. I don't want to suggest anyone's lying to you, because only God knows our intent, and that is the definition of deceit, right? But they can be mistaken. They can perpetuate statements in the anxiety of answering a question that are just not true. And one of them is that land can be calculated separately from overall value. For some of the counties, this has become almost a trend where they're saying, in your case, James, that the land went up faster than the house. And so that's really why your whole value went up. And yet you're looking around and maybe you're in a neighborhood where there is no vacant lot. There is no evidence that they know what the land would sell for. You can't separate the cake from the icing if this is a German chocolate cake or most any other cake. I mean, once you put the icing on the cake, the structure on the land, it's one value. And to suggest that they can do it when they can't even go to the house and walk through the house is misleading at best and deceitful at worst. And I challenge anybody who has a land value increase to say, at least in front of the panel, I don't understand how they can come up with that number. And please don't tell me, well, land's going up in value everywhere. We're not talking about everywhere. We're talking about in my neighborhood, which has been completely built out, where there are no homes that have been burned to the ground or destroyed by a tornado that have now been put out to market solely as land. Mm-hmm. If they don't have the evidence, the burden of proof is on them. They shouldn't be misleading a panel, and they certainly shouldn't won't be fooling an arbitrator. I might note the arbitrators do more than fog a mirror. The reason there's only 200 arbitrators in the state of Texas is because the state comptroller saw fit a few years ago to finally raising the standard to where they had to actually have some education, some some reference that they were informed, like an administrative judge, maybe they were CPAs or lawyers or real estate brokers, but they had something more than just the ability to, as I say, get up in the morning, fog a mirror, and have a heartbeat. And so they tend to be more sophisticated, and they're going to see past this, which is perhaps why some of the counties will settle, because they now know that they might have fooled the panel, but they may not fool an arbitrator. Another point for those of you that know of people who are paying triple net leases and are paying essentially the taxes for their landlord, if you have the responsibility for paying taxes, you have the right to protest under state law. Now, this is something I don't know if I brought up last year, James, but it's something I want to reemphasize, because many of our owner-managed businesses are leasing space, according to what we say in the commercial world, is triple net. We're paying taxes and common area maintenance and insurance for the landlord. So the landlord sometimes isn't prompted to protest the value of their property, and they pass on the bill to the tenant. The tenants need to tell the landlord, look, if you're not going to do it, I want to do it. And let me go forward, or at least prompt the landlord to show evidence that they are filing a protest and they're taking the issue. And if you need some help, again, reach out to me. Another myth is like kind is not like use. What I mean by that is I represented a client who had a manufacturing facility and they wanted to compare it to just an office flex warehouse. Well, no, I want to compare a manufacturing facility to a manufacturing facility of the similar type of product that's being manufactured. So in this case, a dry cleaning facility was compared to a dry cleaning facility. It wasn't compared to just another building with 4 walls and office space. So another myth is that taxable value indicates market value. There's not a real estate professional that would tell you, if they know the truth, that nobody markets your property based on a taxable value. And nobody should hold it against you that you protested what the value was January 1st when you're selling the home this summer. Again, we use the extreme example of a burned down house. If you house burned down on December 31st and you rebuilt it by May, and you could sell it in June for the new value, even though you're only taxed on the lot as of January 1st. So there should be no correlation to those two numbers, but some people think they are. So let's revisit the whole process. I want to wind this down. We're going to file our protest by the 15th, requesting the evidence package. If allowed, we're going to attend an informal hearing, at least by phone, if not by Zoom. We may follow up to the informal before the formal if we start to sense a rapport. I always advise everybody, when you're talking to that appraiser, try and connect with them. Sometimes you just maybe have to ask them, if I was your brother, assuming you love your brother, what would you say I should bring to help my case? And now help them help you, like Jerry Maguire said, because sometimes they'll be sympathetic. Sometimes they'll say, well, this is really good, but could you bring me some more pictures? Or I know you haven't had a chance to get an estimate for this, that, or the other. Could you bring me some estimates? And maybe you feel like you can cut your best deal with the appraiser. But if you don't feel that way, you can still re-prepare with that advice for the formal, at which time you now are put on notice. I would recommend in all cases that you let the panel decide and then be prepared to arbitrate. In worst case, litigate if the value justifies that cost benefit. But for most of us, litigation is not an option and should be the last option. But arbitration is the least option that's being educated, being made aware of to all the taxpayers that are out there in Texas. I show you this picture because Mr. Amasquita, the chief appraiser to the far left, he's smiling, I'm smiling, and this is just after Mr. Garcia, the third man from the left, just got finished being told that his value went from 3.6 to 3.3 million through a formal ruling, after I nearly made the appraiser have a heart attack because I said I think it's worth 1.2 million. And believe it or not, we all walked out. Mr. Garcia is the only one not smiling, but he's the one that wanted the selfies. So we took these pictures, and guess what happened? We went ahead and filed the lawsuit, or it might have been the arbitration. And before there was ever a hearing, we got the county to agree to 1.6 million. So that's not going to be obviously the common result for everybody, but it reflects the fact that Mr. Amasquita and I are not buddies. We don't break bread. We don't play golf together. But I've hosted him in front of the Christian Chamber audience to get to know him better and to have him tell us things like that. I'll quote, "Don't help me do my job." Secondly, the office that he leads, he says, "I tell every one of my staff, treat the taxpayer like they were his mother and he loves his mother." So that's why I say we may be the friendliest county in terms of administration, but we can look to hopefully more Mr. Amosquitas to hopefully change that mood that is going on. Currently in Wilson County, we have a great lady, she's 35 years old, and the environment has gotten so hostile, James, that when they heard that we were having our seminar, she asked if she could be invited because somebody had already threatened her life. I guess they thought we were forming some sort of, I don't know, riot, protest seminar. Like we were going to go, no, we were just teaching what we just taught today. And she showed up and we basically said, look, only 5% of Wilson County's 42,000 taxpayers last year protested. She comes in, she's raising the value. They come in and I'm saying, this is how you protest. And it is a movement. 9,000 people watched on the live stream because the Wilson County News covered it. I would encourage anybody that has anybody in the media that is a friend or an access, please tell them about what we talked about today. We want to get the message out. And the binding arbitration requirements that I was referencing earlier are just this. Once you get that ruling, you've got 60 days from receipt to make a decision. I always say make the decision by the 30th day. Don't make it the day after, but don't wait till the 59th day to call me, because I don't want either of us to be stressed by meeting a deadline. You sign the request, you include a cashier's check to the comptroller, and that's the only time you have to indicate your, what I call real to lower value request, so we can establish that high and the low point, which determines winners and losers. It was Mike Amosquita that taught me about arbitration, and I actually went to a course in Bastrop for 3 days to become an arbitrator because he thought I should get paid for all the information I was disseminating. I said, Mike, thanks for telling me about the course. I took the course, but I don't want to pick winners and losers. I don't want to be on the registry for the comptroller. I'd rather be with the winners. And everybody on this show is a winner if you follow our advice. Unless, of course, they've already made a mistake and it's lower than what you need. But this is the fee. If your value of your homestead is 500,000 or less, your deposit's 450, but the arbitrator's fee is 400. The difference is what the comptroller takes to administer this whole schedule. If your value is over 500,000, the deposit's 500, the arbitrator gets 450. If it's not a residence, notice, so on and so forth, the arbitrator's fee is paid by the loser of the arbitration. And remember, the loser is defined by the midpoint between what the ARB ruled and what you are now suggesting your value is. So with that said, I apologize if I seemed a little verbose, but it's a lot to cover. And we're going to make the slides available to those who request it. James, I'm ready for questions from you, or if you got anybody on a chat.
Wow, Mike, that is some really great information. I know the folks at home really enjoyed that because we have a ton of questions. I'll tell you up front, we actually are not going to have time to cycle through most of those. So let me encourage the folks who are either online now asking questions or who are watching this later, reach out to Mike Berlanga, because of course, as you've just seen, the man knows everything about the process and he wants to help. So use the information that you see on the screen now, Michael at re-now.net, or the phone number that he's provided. And like Mike said, if you want that information and want that PowerPoint, all you have to do, if you registered for the event, you'll receive that in an email, or you can find it at texaspolicy.com. Texas is spelled out. Mike, we have time for maybe one, maybe two questions at the most. Let's see if we can touch on just a few here before we go.
Sure.
Here's one from Joanne, and she says, do we need to have actual estimates from vendors to be valid when you're going through the protest process?
No, it just helps.
Okay.
They're not requirements. These are best suggestions. And James, I want to add, I don't know everything, but I know more because of the people on this program. people like you that are going to contribute. We are, my nonprofit is leading the effort. We're going to set up Facebook groups. If you would just tell us what county you're in, we would like to set up a Facebook group like we did in Wilson County and El Paso County. We'll call it, let's just say Wilson County Taxpayers Association, so that we can collectively kind of affirm each other and support each other with stories like this. So we're in this together. This is not, I'm the expert and I know everything. I know it because I'm in challenge with great questions and support by those like Mr. Cifuentes. So I apologize. What's the next question?
So Mike, Caleb asked this, what happens if the arbitration ruling is higher than his numbers?
Well, I've yet to see that happen. So I can't speak to that. The lady who taught the arbitration class statewide said, in fact, she said, it's almost 50-50 who wins and loses, and it's usually winning and losing over that midpoint. To my knowledge, and I need to research that because it's kind of an excellent question. I don't know that they can go higher than the ruling of the panel, but again, it works against common logic. The appraiser made his best case in front of a jury of their peers in that county, and that's the number that they've set. We're requesting something lower, and either they're going to give us no adjustment or some adjustment that may save us taxes. Watch this. They may give Mr. Cifuentes something higher than the midpoint, but yet it'll still save him taxes that may allow for a cost benefit equalization this year, and yet set a lower number. Real quickly, I have to tell you, short story. We had one case where we did not win the arbitration, but we got the value lowered. We saved $3,000 in taxes for some, about $1 million of land. We got it lowered. The appraiser for the county called me and said at the beginning of the next year and said, I'm going to handle the case this year, and I'm not giving you less than what you got at arbitration last year. I said, that's fine, ma'am. I'm not planning on showing up with a topographical survey to show you how the land really wasn't usable. And I'd encourage you to go out to the property since you're probably getting tired of breathing the fresh air down at the county. She went out there and she's called me back. She says, I nearly broke my neck. I now see what you're talking about. She gave us a value lower than the arbitration from the year before. These are real stories, James. I mean, I can't get more passionate. It's not because I'm had my coffee this morning, because I haven't had any coffee. But when I see that the county is willing to settle before they file the arbitration, or they quote won the arbitration, and yet they tell me, well, we won last year, so therefore, you're not going to get better than that this year. I said, no, but I'm going to have better evidence. And then they agree. We didn't even go to a formal hearing the following year, and she lowered the value back 5 years. Nothing had changed. Raw land, James. It was just raw land. Anyway,
Mike, one day I do want to see you on coffee. I hope to see that one day. We're going to have to leave it there.
Okay.
But again, folks, if I didn't get to your question, or if you think of something in the future that you want to send us, Mike has graciously made himself available. Or you can ping me at jquintero@texaspolicy.com. We are here, both Mike and I, to help taxpayers fight big government and protest your taxes. And so with that, Mike, I want to thank you for your time, for your expertise, and for all the effort that you've put into this. It is well spent, sir.
Thank you. And thank you all, James. I mean, I know that you don't, for those listening, the Texas Public Policy Foundation, I'm going to put in the plug because he's too humble but I know these people, and they are fighting the good fight to make a real reform happen. Please tell more people about Texas Public Policy Foundation. They're in the Capitol. They go to the Capitol. They're maintaining a constant presence. This is not a partisan issue. This is not about Republicans and Democrats. This is not about Christians, Jews, or Muslims. I've been in the mosque, and I'll leave you with this thought. I got an applause from the Muslims on Holy Day in the mosque when I said, unless your Muslim property tax is lower than my Christian property tax, then I think we've got the same problem. And they applauded me, and then they introduced me to another religious group called the Sikhs. So we're all in this together as Texans and taxpayers. So thank you, Texas Public Policy Foundation, for leading with that sort of unified message.
Well, it's our pleasure. And with that, folks, I want to thank you guys for joining us today, and look forward to fielding any questions, comments, and concerns you have in the future. Thanks again, Mike. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you. Bless y'all.